Do not work for food that perishes. This simple saying of Jesus is as curious as it is perhaps challenging, because we know the truth. We do have to work for the food that perishes, or else we will perish. Indeed, our need for earthly food is very real, and certainly a good portion of our resources are spent in order to acquire it each week at the grocery store. But Jesus is not really telling us not to buy food to eat. He is simply pointing out to us how much of our time, effort, and resources we do spend to acquire that which can only nourish us temporarily, and not meal to meal, but during time itself. Because as much as we take care to see that our bodies are fed, still we know we are all, if we're lucky enough, bound to age. We are vulnerable to illness and ultimately to death itself. Rather, by comparison, Jesus is trying to raise our appreciation that the soul, which unlike the body, does have the potential to survive even death, but it also requires nourishment if it is to stay alive. And so we ought to be willing to spend at least as much or even more of our time and effort to acquire that spiritual food that we need to obtain, and to do so each week. Indeed, this food for the soul is, as Jesus explains, the bread of life provided by the Son of Man, Jesus himself. And for us, it only costs us the time and effort it takes us to get to Mass each week in order that we would be nourished by it. But the sad reality that we see today is that there are many who neglect, and some who even terribly resent having to make the time or spend that effort just to come out to church once a week in order to receive it. One experience I had some 25 years ago this summer was when I was studying Spanish in Mexico for 8 weeks. And that experience has left a lasting impression on me, because at the conclusion of my academic program, I was sent with a small group of seminarians, nursing students, and dental hygienist students to a mission village in a very remote part of Mexico for 1 week. As the priest, I was instructed to go and open the church there, and with the help of the seminarians, to put it in order, as it was seldom used because there was no local resident priest. Once we had it ready, we were told to ring the bells about an hour before the time that I would be ready to celebrate the Mass. So after uncovering the altar and dressing it and cleaning up what had to be cleaned up, especially whatever was left around in many places by the birds who had found their way into that building, we went and rang the bells. And then the most amazing sight began to unfold as I stood out on the front steps of that church. Because after about 15 or 20 minutes into the streets of a rather quiet village with no vehicle traffic, because they simply could not afford vehicles, people began to emerge from their homes, a few at first, then in groups, and eventually crowds, even people from the hillsides coming down to fill that church. Many lined up for confession at the entrance of the church, so many that I wondered how I would ever hear those confessions and give them absolution before it was a reasonable time to start the Mass. Really, there was a palpable hunger among those people for what they were seeking, the bread of life, which, because they were so often deprived of it on a regular basis, they had obviously come to very deeply appreciate it as being essential. And so at the bell's notice that there was a priest in town, they dropped whatever they were doing in their homes or on their simple farms to come to Mass en masse. It was a moving sight and an experience that I can never forget. Yet how much wiser, in their third world poverty and deprivation, were they than many who in the midst of our abundance and convenience in the first world, how much wiser to know and recognize what is the greatest treasure. Certainly there are those who drive by this church and others on a regular basis each weekend, yet who rarely or whoever stop to partake of what is being offered here. And I dare say that even right across the street this morning, there have been many people in a tent that serves as a temporary gymnasium during the summer, making the great effort to come out and participate in a spinning class so as to enhance their fitness and their health with the hope that they're going to live longer and better, which is not in and of itself a bad thing. But on Sunday morning, really, we can wager that among them there are many who, because they're fully initiated as Catholics, should be here before they are there on a Sunday. But they won't be, because either they do not fully understand, or maybe they don't believe in what is being offered here. And so instead, take greater care of the body that is destined to die no matter how many exercises classes they attend, while neglecting to nourish the soul, which, if they would but do so, would indeed give them the potential to survive even death. It is that very short-sightedness that Jesus is calling out in this gospel this morning, as he warns those to whom he was speaking in Capernaum that day, not to seek only food that perishes, but rather the one that will endure to eternal life, which is the bread of life, the bread that he alone can and will provide. So let us, who better appreciate the essential nature of the Eucharist to our eternal destiny, not be smug toward those who do not fully understand or fully believe, but rather compassionate first and foremost, but then courageous enough to instruct them, if not by our word, but by our faithful example always, so that if they continue to wrongly reject what is being offered here, the responsibility for doing so will be on their shoulders, not ours. And may we, who do not have to expend such a great effort except for our time to drive here each week to receive the Eucharist so conveniently, never fail to do so or ever take that privilege for granted, but continue to encourage and support vocations to the priesthood, both domestic and missionary, so that no matter where God's people live, their hunger for this essential bread of life may be filled now and in future.